The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. With all the issues facing the Bronx and the city, one that's been out of the limelight of late is homelessness. But with the economy flagging and unemployment soaring, maybe we ought to not be so fast to overlook it. Recently, a hip-hop star, Pras from the Fugies, thought he would like to see what it's like to be homeless, and he left it all behind and put himself on Skid Row in California for 9 days. Tonight, we hope to talk with Pras in California, but we will certainly show you a clip from Skid Row. We weren't sure if he's going to be available, which is the film based on his experience. We also have a man whose life was going upward when he was young before he hit rock bottom and found himself on Skid Row, but he's rehabbed his life and has quite a story to tell us tonight. And here in the studio, one of the city's most passionate homeless advocates will be with us throughout the show. So we have a power-packed show tonight, and if you'd like to weigh in with questions or comments, then please join us on the phone by calling 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. So here in the studio, please join me in welcoming the co-founder and executive director of the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing. It's Marc Greenberg. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And on the phone, a producer and co-star of Skid Row. He's also a consultant for that movie, and now the executive director of external affairs for Volunteers of America. It is Orlando Ward. Orlando, thank you for calling in.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Let's start with you, Mr. Greenberg. Where are we at? I characterized the homeless situation as, gee whiz, it's not in the news anymore, but it used to be. Does that mean the homeless problem is less, or does that mean it's just not in the news?
Well, the numbers of homeless people being sheltered by the city are higher than at any time in history. We have between 41 and 42,000 men, women, and children being sheltered by the city. That doesn't include people who are sleeping on their neighbors or their friends or their family's couch or in a bathtub. So we are in a real difficult position, and it was recently made worse by a decision by the mayor to discontinue a rental subsidy program that was helping some homeless individuals and families out of the shelter and into housing.
Do you think that we're not seeing it in the city of New York and in the Bronx because simply the squeegee men are gone, they have moved them off the streets, or is it simply because it's not being covered by the media?
Well, frankly, I've been seeing more homeless people on the street recently than I had in the past few years. We were making some progress. Just put things in perspective. We could be doing much worse. I mean, the city counts over 100,000 individuals that have been housed over the last 6 or 7 years. So the city is not doing nothing. But if we have 43,000 individuals who are homeless, we're not doing enough. And I have myself been seeing more homeless people on the streets and in subways than I have in recent times.
Am I right in thinking that the issue is transitional housing, that, we can take people off the street, we can put them in some sort of transitional housing, but then we just don't have a way to get them out of that into something permanent so they can begin the process of restructuring their lives?
Well, let me say, we're going to hear from Orlando in a few minutes, and the fact is that when you see someone who's homeless, they're at the lowest point of their entire lives. They've exhausted all options but the street or the shelters. That's not really who they are, but that's who they are at that moment, and half of the work we do is to help folks who are in crisis to move into transition and to get their lives back together, and that is certainly possible, and many hundreds of thousands of people have done that. But the fact is we also have to take a look at why people become homeless. People become homeless for systemic reasons and also personal reasons. And now with the economy as it is and with job market as difficult as it is, there are more opportunities for people to lose their homes and harder for them to make it back.
Is it very logical to trace the recession and the rise in unemployment to homelessness, or is it just simply one of the factors that has exacerbated this very complex problem?
It's one of the factors. You know, frankly, if you want to take a look at the original, the big elephant in the room, it really is the federal government. Up to 1980, 70% of all money that went into affordable housing in this country were federal dollars, 70%. Under Ronald Reagan, he said homelessness is not a national problem. So the numbers dropped by 2/3, and the federal government has never really stepped back in the game. So no matter how much the cities and states try to do, we can't make up the difference. But clearly in New York, we have a lot of resources, and we can do a lot, and we're not doing enough.
Two questions, then we're going to bring Orlando in and tell that very interesting story that I introduced at the outset. In a strange way, would it be better for the homeless advocacy program or programs if there were squeegee men and if there were people around? Because then all of a sudden people would say, wait a minute, why aren't we caring for you? Who are these people? They're getting in my face. Do you think that maybe it would make your job easier if in fact they were a little more prevalent instead of pushed off to the side?
It's hard to say, but clearly I think you're right that the news media doesn't find this a sexy issue frequently.
Well, because people don't see it. People aren't sitting there, waiting to get on the FDR down in the 138th Street and have people, washing their windows.
I think also, frankly, people are very uncomfortable with the issue because many of us realize that we are not that far away from becoming homeless. One or two crises in our lives, and we could lose it as well. And I think it's a very uncomfortable reality. We don't want to really look at that.
Mm-hmm. The last question before we bring Orlando into the dialogue. You talked a little bit about the program that Mayor Bloomberg has defunded and basically cut short.
Right.
Is that the answer? Is there another answer that government can do? Or is there something else out there that you said, you know what, we really need to do?
Well, let me say, the way my organization, the Interfaith Assembly, looks at policy, at advocating for public policies, we've constructed this virtual house with 4 walls, and we say if we can strengthen any of these walls, then we'll do that. The first one is producing affordable housing. Certainly we need to produce more affordable housing. Second is preventing homelessness, which includes strengthening rent regulations. Third is providing services both to keep people in their homes and to help people who are homeless to get back into a fulfilling life. And the fourth is income, supporting income. So it's either through extending unemployment insurance so people can continue to afford for their housing. It's through food stamps, it's through job training, it's for employment, it's public assistance. So we look at all these, and it's really it's got to be a comprehensive effort. But
it seems to me it's not like, well, here's the silver bullet that will answer the homeless problem. You need a program in place to address it from many perspectives. Orlando Ward, again, thank you for joining us. Your story, as I understood it, you were in college and doing very, very well, or it looked like things were going well. Why don't you characterize who you were before things kind of took a negative turn?
Yeah, first of all, let me comment very, very quickly on Mr. Greenberg's comments, particularly when he talks about the transitioning piece. So I think it really plays into my story a lot. Again, college graduate, great jobs, working at Xerox Corporation, a couple other places. My underlying issue that caused my condition of homelessness was drugs and alcohol. And over a 17-year period, beginning somewhere around the mid-'80s, I got caught up into a situation where I continued to destroy structures I had built, to the point where I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't pay the money to rent an apartment or anything else. And it consequently ended up flat on my back on Skid Row.
Let me ask you two things, Orlando. Let me just jump in. Number one, that would suggest that many people would say, you know what, he did this to himself. And then number two, I'm guessing, of course, that you're not the only one, and I'm sure Mr. Greenberg would confirm, you're not the only one who's had this story to tell, that it was drugs and alcohol that really caused the downfall.
Yeah, Mr. Greenberg brought up a very, very good point. The condition of homelessness is caused by systemic issues and personal issues. Mine lean heavily on personal issues. But what I found was, once I did become homeless, once I did, live in a cardboard box, climbing out of it, I'm very much dependent on systems to be in place, systems that were broken, that probably allowed me to stay homeless much longer than I needed to. Mm-hmm. Now, I came from a situation where I had job skills, I had work experience, I had the ability to clean up, if you will, to get employed and get that economic piece back once I dealt with the underlying other issues. Many people don't have that particular advantage, so they stay in that situation much longer.
Right, and they also, if I can interject, many also have personal and whether they be mental issues or other instability issues that will keep them from being as clear thinking as you are. I want to ask you something. You talked about systems or structures that may not have existed or weren't real healthy when you were trying to reclaim, your normal life.
Right.
Give me an example of what those structures were that were missing and what you would have liked to see or what might be helpful right now that doesn't exist.
Well, for example, one of the benefits, if you will, in Los Angeles when I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this situation, we had something called General Relief. General Relief was basically a cash grant to try to help people put housing over their heads. It was accompanied by food stamps that could keep food in your belly. That amount was $212. Los Angeles is one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. I think San Francisco, New York top us. We're not that far behind. Where can I find housing at that amount? In total, in those years, Los Angeles was spending close to $650, $700 million a year in these general relief grants and those type of structures that basically kept people in a cycle of not quite getting to housing.
I can understand.
Dying.
Yeah, I can understand that, but now let me go back to what I suggested before, and there are many people who would say, you know what, this guy did it to himself, why am I taking my tax dollars and going to give him more than that? I think you can understand that people would say, you know what, he did it to himself, why am I paying for it?
And I get that, but what I'm saying is I'm not asking for more than that, use it differently. Create the affordable housing, create the training programs, create the treatment programs, that have the access points that the homeless consumer can actually use. Going back to that GR point, you go down to the office there and you fill out this huge form, and with a college education, I struggled filling it out. I'm wondering how other people can even fill out that form to access this very meager benefit. So let us refine our systems to make them more user-friendly, so that people can access the systems that are available to them, and we won't have as much of a bottleneck as we have now.
Right. Mr. Greenberg, let's go back to what I was saying. How is it very difficult to get the kind of sympathy and support right now, certainly for public expenditures, for support of homeless issues? And I'm guessing you would say it absolutely is.
Well, let me say this. We, as a society, we assume the responsibility of caring for each other to some degree. For example, if someone's out on the street and they're dying, we will not let them die. We will let them go. They'll go into a hospital and we'll care for them. Now, there are studies that show, there are stories, I think it was called the $1 million something, a guy they followed a guy in, I think, Seattle.
Murray.
We paid $1 million in public funds to keep this guy in a hospital and in and out of rehab, where if you take much less money and help him into a permanent apartment and help him with the kind of support he needs, it costs us much less.
What percentage of people do you think who are in a homeless situation now are in a position that Mr. Ward was in with, some education, some ability, I don't want to say that easily, but who could reasonably be rehabilitated and into a point where Mr. Ward is now obviously a productive and contributing member of society?
Well, I would say probably not many are as educated as Orlando, but I think there are certainly some. I think, remember, some, we could say 30% have a history of mental illness. I think at this point we're saying about 25 or 30 are veterans, certainly deserve much more from this country than being out on the street. But I think everyone has a capacity to do more than they're doing when they're out there, just surviving.
Or leeching off the system. You certainly would like to, from the governmental perspective, cut them off in some way, but do it in a way that they are self-sufficient.
And the funny thing is, we talk about the cost. It costs us $3,000 to keep a family in a hotel per month. But it costs us much, much less to keep that family in an apartment for a month.
Orlando, why don't you set us up for Skid Row, and we'll show that clip. What was this about? I saw the trailer that we're going to show here. It's absolutely stirring, and in my mind, it answers part of the question that I was asking about how is it that we're going to be able to, change the public's mind about the nature of homelessness.
Yeah, the Pras Michel, actually a friend of his, contacted me when I was working at the Midnight Mission and said they have this friend that is very, very interested in the homeless issue. He wants to learn more, and we've got this idea that, while he's going through this journey of education, that we can probably turn it into a vehicle to educate the greater public on the issues of homelessness. And so I met Pras, and, he had an idea of coming down and hanging out for a day or so.
I just want to move it forward because we'll run out of time. So basically what he did was he went out as a homeless person. He gave it all away for the 9 days, and then you brought a team with him, undercover as it were, also homeless, to film everything that he did.
Yeah, the idea was you need to spend more than a day. You need to spend more time. He decided to spend 9 days. And it's critical, as Marc was talking, one of the things that I don't think we recognize is that the value shift that allows people to stay out in the streets needs to shift back if they're going to have the attitude that they don't deserve to be there.
Let's show the trailer, which I think is powerful enough. We'll talk about the full film itself, but let's show the trailer so people can get a sense of what we're talking about, and then we'll talk about the impact that it might have and the implications that it certainly suggests for the rest of us. So this is a clip from Skid Row.
Refugees, my mom. My father. Dedication.
Lots of celebrities talk the talk, but there's one hip-hop star who's walking the walk. Pras takes you from his high life to the street life.
It seems like the more I ask, the less they give. Is there a place in this world?
Pras spends 9 days on Skid Row with no money, no shelter, and no way out.
I had to figure out what my hustle would be. You have a quarter? Thank you. I had to eat.
I'm not going to sleep in the rain on the cement. That ain't going to never happen.
I ain't come up enough. I ain't making enough money. As I spend more time down here, all my things that I believed in are slowly starting to evaporate. It's like you're in some other world. It's just like a plague just hit.
I come from a family of drugs.
I feel like I've been beaten by like 20 whips.
Look at my body. I've been strangled. I've been shot at.
I never thought I would ever get into the hard drugs.
Why are y'all driving down this block right now? It's too hot.
A harrowing journey.
That's not how the streets work. You may be doing a documentary, but you're putting people's lives in danger.
To find the truth.
If they have any suspicion that they think we cops, it's either them or us.
And make a difference.
I want to find out who it is.
Word will get around who you are.
And we're turning around.
Easy one.
I don't have a solution for this,
one thing that I would like is to at least let people know that it does exist.
Skid Row. From Screen Media.
Well, there we go. Skid Row, a powerful concept. It had been tried by a number of people. I remember Pat Harper, a New York City newswoman, did it for a short period of time. Orlando, what do you think the impact of this movie is, and what do you think it ultimately, what story does it ultimately tell?
Well, first of all, it tells the story of somebody that was open enough and compassionate enough to invest himself and some time into this. But what we had hoped to accomplish, and I think we came pretty far along the way, is to shine a light on this kind of dark secret that we have, particularly in our urban areas in America. And, because it seems so intractable, people would rather pretend homelessness doesn't exist. And this kind of throws it right back in your face. Mm-hmm. Now, the film, because we were limited on time, really talked more about the problem and into that solution. But I think that's a place to start, so that people recognize that it hasn't gone away.
Orlando, at this moment, I'm thrilled to say that Pras from the Fugies is on the line. We don't know how good the connection is, but Pras, thank you so much for joining us. We got you here tonight?
Hello?
Yes, hi Pras, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks for having me.
Good, thank you. We don't have a lot of time left, but give me an idea of what you learned from that experience of going on Skid Row after living a life that's kind of a nice life, being a music star.
Well, I just basically, what I've learned is that there's actually a face to homelessness. Whereas before, I used to think that people who are homeless are more like drug dealers or drug users, and people who have really nothing going on in their lives. But then you realize that's the contrary. I guess that's the biggest thing that I got out of it.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the things that I thought as I watched the trailer and see you, living a different sort of a life than you did when you were homeless, is that in some ways, and Orlando Ward is as good an example of that as any, it could happen to anybody. And did you have that sense, because you were acting a part, did you have that sense, gee, what if this ever happened to me, how I would feel and how I would act?
Oh, no, definitely. You're right. It could happen to any one of us, especially people who don't have a strong support system. Like something unfortunately was to happen to me, I can always go back to my mom's house, last case scenario, but a lot of people don't even have that. They don't have a friend, they don't have anyone they can lean on, and so it's scary, because if I didn't have that, and something was to happen to me, I would be in the same situation.
And what's interesting, and I guess as hard as you tried to act the part, in the back of your mind you always knew that there was a bailout if necessary. You could go back to your mom's house, or you had other support systems, and you knew what your real life was. What message does this tell, or would you like it to tell, to people who might be watching it and might be considering what we need to do with people who are homeless?
Well, listen, obviously there's a system, there's a problem in the system, What I like to tell people is the basic is, when you see someone who's homeless, I'm not saying you got to run and take that person to your home, but, if you don't want to give a person change or, at least acknowledge the person. Sorry, I don't have anything, my friend, that alone makes that person feel like at least you acknowledge them as a human being. You don't necessarily have to. You got to use your discretion on whether or not you want to give someone, change or money. But acknowledge the person the same way you would acknowledge someone, a stranger in a library or in a workplace. It's the same way. You acknowledge that person. The same way you would acknowledge a dog. If a dog came up to you, you would pet the dog. That's what I would say to anyone. Now whether or not you want to get involved, you want to go to a shelter and volunteer. That's something that you got to, have a conversation with yourself, of consciousness.
Did this start a larger commitment for you? Did you say, after doing this, gee whiz, maybe now I'm going to, either give more or do more? In other words, I guess what I'm reaching for is, did it change you as an artist and as a person that maybe some of your own actions, might be altered in the future?
It definitely. I mean, listen, this is something that I would take with me for the rest of my life, and just what I've just said to you, it definitely does. I mean, just walking on right now I'm in California, just walking on Sunset Boulevard, when I see people are homeless, I stop. When they stop me, I have a little bit of dialogue with them. I give them what I can, just to kind of because I know what it felt like. Even though in the back of my mind I was doing a documentary, but you can't help to know what you feel when somebody treats you a certain way, not knowing who you are.
Right.
When I was treated the way I was treated down in Skid Row, they didn't even know who I was.
Right.
So they treated me like I was no one.
I guess it puts, we're almost out of time, but I guess it puts the fame and the other things that you get out of that in perspective to say, you know what, I know where that's at now, because they don't treat me necessarily like a human being. It's because of my music and my art that they treat me that way. We're almost out of time. I want to ask Orlando Ward, is the movie going to be shown anywhere? Is there a way to see it? And, what are your final words here on the impact of what Pras did and Skid Row is about?
I know we got access to it on the website, and it is available as an educational tool. I think Pras is very, very courageous, and he's being a little bit modest because, at day 3, day 4, whatever way out in the back of his mind was buried very, very deeply, because there was an emotional shift that comes when you're exposed and forced to survive and sleep on the streets, and you start doing things that you didn't think you would do.
Right. Orlando,
I thought for a minute that we're going to have Pras eating pork.
Right. Listen, I want to ask Mr. Greenberg a final question. How important is something like what they did to change the image of homelessness as to who these people are that need a place to live?
I think the image, we have to continue, as Pras was saying, we have to continue to remind ourselves that the person out there who's homeless is a human being, deserves respect, deserves dignity. We also, though, have to be able to take that awareness and point people's attention to the ways we can change policy. Because just concern alone is not enough. People need to be educated, and we need to change the system that impacts and keeps people homeless or helps people or forces people to have no choice but the streets.
Pras Michel, thank you so much for the great music, and more importantly for what you have done here for the people who are really in need. Orlando Ward, congratulations on your recent success, and thank you for your passion. And Marc Greenberg, thank you for your hard work to fight for all people of the city of New York. Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, you email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Next week, we'll be joined by the artist who painted this gorgeous mural that we use for our set, and he'll show us all his different pictures and things like that. Then on August 6th, we get into the political season in anticipation of the primaries. The chairman of the Bronx County Democratic Committee, Carl Hasty, will join us, and as I mentioned, the gorgeous new set was custom designed for Bronx Talk, by BronxNet's Gene Elton, based on the original mural that I mentioned by Daniel Haubin. Thanks to our producer, Jane Floro, our director, Michael Arias, our cast of thousands around. Good night. We got to go.
Thank you.